Hey everybody, it's Joel with Retro Epics, where I rewatch, replay, and revisit old school video games, movies, TV shows, and more, and then rate and review them to see how well they stand up to the test of time. Today, I'm excited to rewatch the original web crawler Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man. Spider-Man is a 2002 American superhero film based on the Marvel comic characters of the same name, directed by Sam Raimi from a screenplay by David Kopp based on Spider-Man characters created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. It's the first installment in the original Spider-Man trilogy, starring Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man, alongside Kirsten Dunst as his love interest Mary Jane, James Franco as his best friend Harry Osborn, J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson, and Willem Dafoe as the villain Norman Osborn, aka Green Goblin. It was the first film to ever reach $100 million in a single weekend, with a box office gross of over $821 million worldwide. It was the third highest grossing film of 2002, behind other retro epics Lord of the Rings 2 and Harry Potter 2, the highest grossing superhero film ever at the time, and the sixth highest grossing film overall at the time of its release. The movie was also nominated for 2 Academy Awards for Best Visual Effects and Best Sound. So what's Spider-Man all about? The movie starts off with Peter Parker on a class field trip to Columbia University's genetics lab, where a genetically modified spider has escaped its containment and bites Peter on the hand. He immediately goes home, where he feels ill and passes out. Meanwhile, Norman Osborn is also the owner of Oscorp and is trying to land a big military contract. He ends up experimenting on himself with an unstable performance-enhancing drug, where he ends up killing his assistant and stealing his retro glider and suit and flies off. The next morning, Peter wakes up and realizes he's no longer nearsighted and has also developed a much more muscular physique. At school, he notices he can now shoot webs from his wrists and also has extremely fast reflexes. He then realizes that he's acquired all the abilities of the spider that bit him, as he's able to now crawl walls and shoot webs. After getting into a fight with Flash Thompson at school, Peter goes home, where he has a heart-to-heart with his Uncle Ben on the car ride into town. Uncle Ben then lands these famous words, "With great power comes great responsibility." Peter completely blows him off and goes into town to enter into a wrestling competition, where he hopes to win $3,000 to buy a new car to impress his main crush, Mary Jane. Peter ends up winning the match against Bonesaw McGraw in 2 minutes, and then when he goes to get his paycheck for $3,000, the promoter stiffs him and only gives him $100. Peter leaves disappointed, and as he's leaving, a thief breaks into the office and demands all the money from the promoter. The promoter looks for Peter to help stop him as he was running away, but instead Peter steps aside. Peter then leaves the building and goes outside to find Uncle Ben, only to find out that Uncle Ben has been shot by a carjacker. Peter overhears the police talking about their scanners and runs to go find the criminal. As Peter's chasing the criminal, he realizes it's the same criminal that he failed to stop earlier at the wrestling event, and that if he had only stepped in then, he could have saved his Uncle Ben. As the criminal then realizes that Spider-Man is no longer there to hurt him, he immediately goes to draw his gun. Peter quickly reacts and knocks him back, trips over a pipe, and falls out the window. Meanwhile, Norman Osborn has hijacked the glider and the exoskeleton suit and flies over to the rival Quest Aerospace, where he ends up destroying their experiment and killing several people in the process. The following day, he's shown waking up having no memory of this event. Upon graduation, Peter decides to take a full-time effort of stopping crime and becoming Spider-Man. Peter, looking to earn money while he's still doing his crime fighting at night, looks for a job and finds an opportunity for a photographer at the Daily Bugle. J. Jonah Jameson hires him to become his personal photographer for Spider-Man. However, Jameson continuously uses these photos to actually discredit Spider-Man, calling him a menace to the society. Meanwhile, Peter then decides to move in with his best friend Harry in town. After learning that the board of directors intends to remove Norman Osborn from the head of his own company, he comes back later as the Green Goblin and throws his pumpkin bomb at the board of directors, killing many of them at the World's Fair. As Spider-Man, Peter intervenes and stops the Green Goblin from any further damage, as well as saving Mary Jane from falling. J. Jonah Jameson then goes on to dub Norman Osborn, or the Green Menace at the time, the Green Goblin. After Norman realizes he now has this split personality between Green Goblin, they decide to try to recruit Spider-Man to see if he can be on their side instead of against them. When the two meet up again in a burning building, Spider-Man declines his offer, leading to a fight where Peter suffers a cut on his left arm. When Peter and Harry then later invite Norman over for Thanksgiving dinner with Aunt May and Mary Jane, Norman immediately notices the cut on Peter Parker's left arm and immediately has to excuse himself from dinner as he realizes Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Knowing that he can't hurt Spider-Man, but he can hurt Peter Parker, the Green Goblin decides to go after those he loves, starting with Aunt May. Mary Jane then goes on to admit to Peter that she's in love with Spider-Man, and as Harry oversees the two talking and holding hands, he immediately begins to think that Mary Jane has feelings for Peter and tells his father that Peter has always had feelings for Mary Jane and he's been in love with her ever since the 4th grade. Realizing Mary Jane is now the key weakness of Spider-Man, Norman takes Mary Jane up to the top of the Queensboro Bridge as well as the Roosevelt Island trolley car full of children and makes Spider-Man decide to save one of the two as he drops Mary Jane and the trolley full of children at the same time. Spider-Man jumps off, able to save Mary Jane and catch the children in time, and just as the Green Goblin is trying to fight him off, the citizens of New York City jump in and throw bricks and other debris at Green Goblin, fighting him off and protecting New York and protecting Spider-Man. As they race to their final fight, Spider-Man eventually gets the best of the Green Goblin, who eventually unmasks to reveal himself to be Norman Osborn, and while he is begging for Spider-Man to please give him grace, to not hurt him, to help him, he secretly triggers his glider to come and attack Spider-Man from behind, but his spider senses trigger and he jumps out of the way and the glider impales the Green Goblin, killing him as he begs him to not tell his son Harry. Spider-Man then takes Norman Osborn's body back to his house where he lays him down, and as he's getting ready to leave, Harry walks in and assumes that Spider-Man has just killed his father. At his father's funeral then, Harry talks to Peter about how he vows revenge and he will kill Spider-Man for what he did to his father. At the funeral, Mary Jane also confesses her love for Peter Parker, but Peter has to decline and say that they can only be friends, fearing that anyone who gets close to him would be immediately in danger as he is Spider-Man. So, how does Spider-Man hold up nearly 20 years later? Starting off with story, there's a clear battle between good and evil with Spider-Man and Green Goblin, and also a love triangle story with Mary Jane, Harry, and Peter. This is a classic comic book story and one that never gets old, but is a little bit tired here, so I rate it an 8 out of 10. The reason I drop a few points is the Green Goblin is written as just kind of a crazy, scary person with just a desire to kill anyone out against him, and Peter just doesn't hit as that lovable comedic character that Spider-Man should be. He's just kind of mopey and depressed, and also the love story, which is driving this from the very beginning, fails to pay off as he ends up having to walk away and say that he can never be more than just friends. Moving on to acting and characters, this is again a bit of a mixed bag here. Willem Dafoe, 10 out of 10. Steals the show, is amazing, just is chewing on scenery the entire time, and is a perfect Green Goblin. Tobey Maguire as Spider-Man is solid. He does a good job of having that kind of nerdy kid and awkwardness, but he doesn't have that fun, quippy attitude, especially when he transforms into Spider-Man. It just doesn't come off as authentic, and you fail to relate to him as much as you would love to. You're not cheering for him and really rooting for the hero in this as much as you'd like to. Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane does a well enough job. Again, she's very likable and you can feel for her. She's the girl next door. But again, nothing special, nothing outstanding. Everyone else in the movie, including James Franco, is kind of forgettable, having very one-note character arcs. The one other saving grace to this movie, though, is J. Jonah Jameson, J.K. Simmons, who plays a phenomenal character in this, and again, chews up the scenery, plays a perfect comic book version of the character, and was a wonderful delight to watch. Overall, because of the mixed bag, I give it an 8 out of 10. For entertainment value, this movie has that in spades. There's great swinging cinematography views where you look like you're Spider-Man. There's lots of cool camera tricks. Throughout the entire movie, things are happening, you're moving, to keep you on the edge of your seat. There's all these jump scares with Green Goblin to have you always on edge of where is he coming. The only thing I wish they really would have upped the value of here is some of the comedic value that they've done in other Spider-Man movies. Overall, I give it a 9 out of 10 on entertainment. Visuals and cinematography is one of the challenging areas for me to rate too. Going back to 2002, the CGI in this film was cutting edge and breaking, and they wanted to use it as much as possible, which today is what kills it, because what was cutting edge in 2002 looks like something from a PlayStation 3 cutscene today. Any of the Spider-Man things where he's swinging through the city and doing bunches of backflips just doesn't look real. It looks, like I said, like a video game now. However, some of the swinging cinematography views where the camera is swooping through the buildings looks amazing. A lot of the cuts and cinematography usage of it is really dynamic, action-oriented, great to keep you on the top of your seat. But even with all that, the CGI just doesn't hold up to today's standards. So as I'm rating it today, I give it a 7 out of 10. Sound and music is where this movie really shines. While you may not immediately go back and think to this movie as an iconic soundtrack like Star Wars or Jurassic Park, when you listen to this movie, it has a dynamic theme. It has a superhero underscore orchestra type tone throughout the movie that, again, if you go back and watch it, there's definitely some beats that you remember and some iconic tones. In addition to the theme music, the soundtrack is also iconic as the lead single Hero by Chad Kroeger, the lead singer of Nickelback, is a chart-topping single that went on to worldwide sensation that I'm sure you had on your iPod back in the day. While not truly an iconic, memorable sound and music experience, I can't knock this retro epic too much and give it a 9 out of 10 for sound and music. Relevancy for me is a hard one here. If you look back, this was the original superhero movie that kicked off 20 years of Marvel and DC super hits. This was the first real blockbuster that said you can make a superhero movie. And if you watch it again today, it's a Marvel superhero movie. It's got big, colorful characters, just like any other one today, and you'd think would still work well today. The movie even went on to spin off 2 sequels with this trilogy, another 2-movie Amazing Spider-Man trilogy, and a 3-movie Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man trilogy. All of these things would lead to make me say this is a 10 out of 10 for relevancy, but going back and watching it again, there are some issues in that it's dated and the CGI doesn't work as well, the stories aren't as powerful, maybe the casting wasn't top-notch like it is today, and so comparing the original movie, while it set great precedent and it allowed other great movies to follow behind it, there's still too many gaps for me to give it a perfect 10, so I ultimately take 1 point off and rate it 9 out of 10 for relevancy. Lastly, rewatchability. I go back, think through all the things we've reviewed today and say, would I watch this movie again? And full disclosure here, I'm a huge superhero movie fan, and so I'm a bit biased in this, but I love every movie that gives me great action, great excitement, superheroes, people to cheer for, a romantic love story, and something that you can see with the entire family. I think you could pop this movie on today, stream it, and have no problem watching it with kids who were not even alive during this original. However, there is a couple of off-color things that don't work as well today, including one bad off-color gay joke. Another great thing about rewatching some of these old retro epics is as they start to remake and revisit these, you can go back and find the fun Easter eggs that they threw in there with references like Shazam and Superman hidden within the movie. So again, for rewatchability, overall, I knock it down a point, give it a 9 out of 10. So where does that bring us to overall? Add everything up, and you get an 8.5 out of 10 solid B movie, which I think is appropriate for this. It has lots of great beats, but there are some things that don't hold up 20 years later. It's still enjoyable, it's still a great watch, still a retro epic that I think you should revisit, enjoy, prepare yourself when you rewatch the other Spider-Man movies. Overall, lots to love, but some things that didn't age quite as well as you'd like. Alright everybody, thank you for watching this retro epic with me. Remember to subscribe and comment down below. Tell me what retro epics you want me to rewatch, revisit, or replay in a future episode. And make sure to like and share this movie with all your friends.